came in all the way back in May, it was very, very clear that they weren't that eager to speak to the press. They were delivering pre-prepared statements or just saying, we're not quite ready to speak to the press quite yet, even though they had made this whole thing about we are going to be the party of openness and transparency. It was quite really weird, to be honest. And then, of course, just a couple of months later, we had all the stuff about Nottinghamshire County Council going on to ban not only the BBC Local Democracy Reporting Service, but also the Nottinghamshire Live Post / the Nottingham Post, etc. Whatever. It's both the same thing-ish. But and they banned that. And they kept that up for almost a month. But after intense pressure, after looking like absolute fools, and not only that, but undoing then the ban on the BBC Local Democracy Reporting Service, but not on Nottinghamshire Live, only for then a couple of days later that ban also then being lifted. It made Reform look like absolute cowards, which, again, they absolutely are. That's why they don't want to speak to journalists, because, you know, journalists ask awkward questions that they don't want to answer. It's always about, you know, meeting them where they are, not going to them and asking questions about decisions they've made or stuff that they've said. That's what they don't like being asked questions about, because that's when, well, they all start to unravel. Now, most of the media press and media relations since they have took over has, apart from, you know, if you exclude the stuff that happened in Nottinghamshire, been pretty much normal. Some of them have like engaged with the press, but it's not been, you know, we'll sit down and do an interview with you. Very, very rarely have they actually done that, especially after the car crash that also happened in Nottinghamshire around that as well. So what's tended to have happened is that they now do prepared statements by, guess what? The unit down in London. That's what tends to do all these prepared statements. They then send it back. They then end up, you know, releasing that. It is really weird for a party that constantly talks about we are going to bring transparency to the local level and unearth all this waste, fraud, and abuse that's been going on these councils, to then turn around and then be the exact opposite when they get in. Who would have thought? But anyway, guess what we're talking about today? So before we do get, of course, into this as well, please, of course, do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's YouTube membership down below as well. There is also the QR code up here, which will take you straight, of course, to the Patreon page as well. And of course, don't forget to click the like, click the share button, ring the bell, of course, to get notifications when we go live and we drop a new video. And of course, leave a comment down below, because I'm always very interested to hear from people who do live in these areas about what they think about their Reform people. It is very illuminating when you have these people from a local area that give you a lot of local knowledge about what's going on in this area. So, as always, before we do crack on, thank you very much for all the support you guys show, and let's crack on then into this. So, oh look, Reform councillor snubs journalists minutes after election. What a surprise. And why? Because this guy was taking over. If you may remember, there was a Reform councillor in Northamptonshire, not Nottinghamshire, in Northamptonshire, where, well, he decided to use the N-word against the family that lived next door. Again, vetting process almost non-existent for these Reform candidates. What a shock. So let's find out more about this. So a newly elected Reform councillor has now refused to speak to journalists just minutes after his victory. Lee Duffy, who declined to answer any questions from the Northamptonshire Telegraph and, of course, the BBC Local Democracy Reporting Service after his win in Corby. The poll, of course, in the Lloyds and Corby Village ward had, of course, been triggered by the resignation of the previous incumbent Reform councillor Rob Bloom after allegations he used the N-word against a local black family. Those weren't allegations, they actually happened. The family came forward and said, yeah, this is what happened. They even had video of it. At that point, it's not an allegation. because we covered that a couple of months ago when that happened. But once again, reform vetting process non-existent. It's exactly like the UKIP days, but you've got to remember this is still UKIP. They've just rebranded under a different colour. But anyway, back to this. This fresh now controversy involving the reform councillors, of course, in the regional press, came, of course, weeks after the party's ruling group on the Nottinghamshire Council, of course, lifted its month-long ban on Nottinghamshire Post. Reforms Councillor Matthew Griffiths, the leader of the Nottinghamshire County Council, defended his new colleague's decision at the announcement, telling reporters it's his choice. Except, here's the thing, he is now a local councillor. He's now an elected representative. Him refusing to engage with the press sends a statement about your party when you are the party that is all about openness and transparency and freedom of speech. You don't actually engage with those mechanisms. You don't want to engage with that stuff. So the move, of course, has been criticised by Kate Coyne, the Corby reporter at The Telegraph. She said on Twitter, this elected representative who now has a responsibility for spending many millions now in public money. His party has now repeatedly, of course, opined about the transparency in local government, but this is the very first time since I've ever seen a by-election candidate has now refused to speak to reporters. What a surprise. Like I say, a sign of things to come. They constantly do this. In a statement, Councillor Griffiths said, Councillor Lee has, of course, been a very community champion in Corby for many years. I know he will serve the residents of Lloyd and Corby brilliantly, whichever way they voted. To be honest, hasn't really turned out that way, especially for these other reform councillors, seeming to have been ignoring these other voters who didn't vote for them. Lee, of course, shared my ambition in the years ahead that NSC will now complete its journey and transform into an exemplary council. We'll see if that ever happens. One, of course, that puts families and communities first and foremost as we now roll out and deliver on our brand new corporate plan. And oh boy, that will be interesting to see when that happens, but that will be next year to see if that corporate plan actually does anything. They're still in the planning stages for it at the moment. So we'll see if that, of course, actually does anything for them. Likely it's not going to. So he said he is, of course, extremely proud to lead a group of councillors like Lee, who, of course, care passionately about their place and the people who they serve. Well, apparently not according to a lot of the other, reform councillors who have jumped ship or left the party recently. It is and always will be the party of Nigel Farage. You've got to make the dear leader look good, and your incompetence is making him look bad. So, you've got to go now. So, and of course, remember, Linda Carman still in position at the time of doing this video. So, as always, let me know what you think about all this. No doubt, I'm sure this council will do a terrible job because they all seem to be doing just as equally bad as each other. It's like, who can be the worst councillor this week, quite frankly. So, as always, let me know what you think, by the way, if you are from Northampton, what you think about all this, about what's going on in your area. I'd always love to know what you think. And of course, leave a comment down below. Click the like, click the share button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.